The Silent Sedition. The grand ballroom of the Whisperwold Manor was a fortress of light against the encroaching dark. Outside, beyond the manicured hedges and the spell-warded iron gates, the world was reportedly burning. Rumors of the brutal wars against revolutions and mythical beasts drifted into the capital like smoke, but here, under the crystal chandeliers, the only battles fought were those of social etiquette. The orchestra played a waltz that was desperate to drown out the distant thrum of artillery, or perhaps it was the roar of a drake that occasionally vibrated through the floorboards. Anon stood near the velvet drapes of the eastern alcove, a position calculated to offer maximum visibility with minimal participation. He was a man defined by a quiet, invisible internal identity. He was stoic, watchful, and deliberately unremarkable. In a society that thrived on peacocking, Anon functioned as a quiet mirror, a surface that reflected the vanity of others while retaining the ability to see what they missed. He held a glass of sherry he had no intention of drinking, his eyes scanning the swirling kaleidoscope of silks and uniforms. His gaze settled, as it often did, on the periphery of the room. There sat Booker. She was the antithesis of the frantic gaiety surrounding her. While other debutantes maneuvered for introductions to officers, Booker was tucked into a low-backed chair, isolated by a deliberate radius of silence. She was defined by curiosity and sensitivity, traits that seemed ill-fitted for a wartime ball. As always, she was found with a book in hand, a small, leather-bound volume she read with a voracious, almost desperate intensity. To the casual observer, and indeed to the general public of the ballroom, she appeared soft and studious. She was dressed in muted tones, a pale lavender that faded into the upholstery, suggesting a desire to disappear. Anon observed her surface reality, a shy intellectual trusting and seemingly unguarded in a room full of vipers. The interactions between them in the past had been strictly governed. They had spoken only of the weather or current events, polite trivialities that masked the keenness of his observation. But tonight, the air was thick with the static of unseen magic. The Arcane Regency was a setting where the polite veneer often hid grotesque arcane truths. A footman approached Booker. He did not carry a silver tray with crystal flutes, but a single, folded missive. Anon narrowed his eyes. The delivery was subtle, a sleight of hand that would have fooled anyone not trained to look for the breaks in the pattern. Booker took the letter, and for a fleeting second her soft, studious mask slipped. Her eyes darted left, then right, checking for observers. She missed Anon in the shadows. She turned the letter over. From his vantage point, aided by the ambient magnification of his monocle, a tool of his own making, Anon saw the seal. It was not the wax crest of a noble house, nor the official stamp of the military. It was a smudge of dark, resinous clay. Anon recognized it instantly from his studies of the lower orders. It was sealed with common folk magic, the kind used in the slums for augury or poisoning. The contradiction jarred him. A woman who moved within intimate, intellectually focused circles like poetry nights and book clubs had no business receiving correspondence sealed with hex mud. The ambiguity of the moment crystallized. Anon felt the familiar prickle of a hunch on the back of his neck. Everything was not as it seems. Booker slipped the letter into her bodice, snapped her book shut, and rose. She did not head for the dance floor, but for the terrace doors. Anon set his sherry on a passing tray. He committed himself then to the investigation, stepping away from the wall to follow the thread of this anomaly. The night air was sharp, smelling of ozone and wet cobblestones. Booker moved with a speed that belied her earlier lethargy. She did not take the family carriage. Instead, she hailed a hired hackney, a risky move for a lady of her station. Anon did not hail a cab. He relied on his genius background, an adeptness at technology and mathematics that he kept hidden beneath his drab exterior. He calculated the carriage's likely velocity and the grid of the city streets. He knew the shortcuts through the mews that the horses could not take. He moved on foot, his stride long and efficient, utilizing his observant nature to navigate the shadows. He tracked her movements as the city transitioned from the limestone facades of the aristocracy to the timber and brick warrens of the docklands. The narrative of her life was shifting levels. He was no longer observing a debutante. He was hunting a mystery. The description of his pursuit shifted, noting the damp sheen on the cobblestones and the rhythmic, accidental brush of his coat against the rough brickwork as he cornered. The hackney stopped in front of a dilapidated warehouse near the river. The windows were boarded, but cracks of yellow light bled through the timber. Booker descended, pulling her cloak tight. She did not look like a lost girl now. She looked purposeful. Anon found a vantage point on a fire escape opposite the building. He watched as the door opened. She was greeted not by poets or literary critics, but by rough-hewn men and women wearing the red sashes of the, quote, communist uprisings, and the distinct feathered talismans of the indigenous revolutions, fighting the wars off-scene. The contradiction hit Anon with the force of a physical blow. Booker was not attending a book club. She was walking into a war room. He watched through a gap in the boards. He saw her pull the letter from her dress and slam it onto a table covered in maps. She spoke, and the rough men listened. She pointed to a map of the front lines. She was not a passive observer of the war. She was a participant. The verification was complete. A secret life existed, one that stood in stark opposition to the surface reality of the shy girl in the ballroom. But seeing was not enough. In the game of espionage, one needed tangible proof. He needed to know the specific nature of her involvement. Was she a courier? A financier? Or something more dangerous? He waited until the meeting dispersed. He watched her return to the safety of the hackney. He did not follow her home. He knew where she lived. Instead, he prepared to infiltrate the one place where she let her guard down completely, her private study. 2 nights later, during a gala at the Booker estate, Anon put his preparation into action. While the house was distracted by the orchestra and the flow of champagne, he slipped away from the festivities. He utilized the servants' corridors, moving like a ghost. He reached the heavy oak door of her study. It was locked, naturally, but the mechanism was a simple tumbler system, child's play for a man of his technical genius. He manipulated the lock and slipped inside. He was now in the point of no return. This was the immediate environment where the secret was stored. The room smelled of old paper, lavender, and the sharp, metallic tang of drying ink. It was a chaotic contrast to the orderly salon downstairs. Books were piled in precarious towers. Not novels, Anon noted as he stepped closer, but treatises on structural engineering, supply lines, and arcane ballistics. He moved to the desk. It was cluttered with papers. He began to sift through them, his gloved hands moving with precision. He found receipts for ink and parchment, standard household accounts. But then, he found a false bottom in the center drawer. He pried it open. Inside lay a stack of pamphlets. The ink was still fresh. Anon picked one up, angling it toward the moonlight streaming through the window. The text was incendiary. It was a manifesto calling for the dismantling of the Arcane Regency, for the redistribution of magical artifacts to the common folk, and for the cessation of the colonial wars. But it was not the content that stopped Anon's heart. It was the handwriting. The looping, elegant script was unmistakable. It was the same hand that had signed his dance card 3 nights ago. The secret was exposed. Booker was not just reading history or sympathizing with the enemy. She was documenting the revolution to incite change within the Regency itself. She was the author of the Sedition. She was the mind behind the strategy he had seen in the warehouse. Anon, usually stoic, felt a tremor run through his hand. The reaction was decisive and emotional. He had expected a lover, perhaps, or a gambling debt. He had not expected this. He was shaken by the dangerous depth of her intellect. The woman he had dismissed as a, quote, shy intellectual was, in fact, a tactical genius operating under the nose of the crown. He heard the handle of the door turn. There was no time to hide. He stood his ground, the pamphlet in his hand, as the door opened, and Booker stepped in. She froze. The light from the hallway framed her silhouette. She was dressed in a gown of shimmering silver, a stark contrast to the treason in Anon's hand. The dynamic shifted instantly. In that quiet room, Anon no longer saw a naive girl. He saw a dangerous intellectual equal. The illusion of her fragility shattered, replaced by a terrifying competence. She did not scream. She did not run. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her eyes locking onto his. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a tension that far exceeded the polite discourse of the ballroom. This was a moment of high intimacy. They were chemically, dangerously close. Anon broke the silence. He did not ask what she was doing. He simply looked at the pamphlet and read aloud, his voice low and steady. The chains of the magocracy are forged in the silence of the good. It was an acknowledgement. By reciting the line from her pamphlet, he validated the reality of her secret. He was not accusing her. He was quoting her. Booker exhaled, a long, shaky breath. She took a step toward him. "It is a draft," she said softly. "The rhythm in the second stanza is poor." She did not deny it. Anon looked at her. He held the power to destroy her. One word to the magistrates, and she would hang for treason. The war outside would claim her. But as he looked at her, really looked at her, stripped of her social armor, he felt a strange alignment. He was a quiet mirror, a man who saw the truth when others saw only reflections. And the truth was, she was right. The Regency was rotting. He lowered the pamphlet. He had to decide whether to expose her or protect her. The internal acceptance of this new truth about her identity settled over him like a cloak. He realized that her rebellion was the fire that matched his own cold, analytical silence. "The rhythm is fine," Anand said, "but your distribution network is flawed. The warehouse on the docks is too exposed." Booker's eyes widened. She stared at him, searching for the trap. She found none. The consequences of the night were detailed explicitly in the silence that followed. Anand was no longer just an observer. He had become her accomplice. He would become her quiet mirror and protector, using his silence and his invisibility to shield her treason from the world. "You tracked me," she stated, not as a question, but as a realization. "I did," Anand replied. "And if I could do it, the Inquisitors can too. You need better ciphers. You need a ghost." She moved closer, taking the pamphlet from his hand. Her fingers brushed his. "And you are offering to be this ghost?" "I am offering to ensure you survive your own intellect," he said. They stood there in the moonlight, the pact sealed without a handshake. The final status was established. The secret would remain hidden between them forever. They were two spies in the house of society, bound by a crime that could kill them both. The following week, the ballroom was as bright and loud as ever. The war rumbled in the distance. Anand stood by the eastern alcove, his sherry untouched. He watched Booker across the room. She was sitting in her usual chair, the picture of docility. She held a book in her lap, reading quietly, appearing soft and studious in her muted tones. The world saw a wallflower. But Anand saw the truth. He watched her turn the page, knowing that her soft, studious appearance was the armor for a revolutionary spirit. He caught her eye across the sea of dancers. She didn't smile, but she tilted her book slightly, a microscopic gesture acknowledged only by him. He took a sip of his sherry. The game had changed. The discovery was made, and for the first time, the mirror had something worth reflecting.